Hello, my name is Ian Neal and I've been asked to give a walkthrough of my Neo4j application called the Codex. So what is the Codex? The Codex is an attempt to create what I call an atlas of history. And what I mean by that is rather than storing historical information in the form of raw textual narratives, analyses, that kind of thing, it's instead an attempt to break down a historical narrative into a sequence of events, which you would think of as a timeline or a chronology. And if you think about those sequences of events, they could be nodes. Those nodes can relate to people, places, works of art, and to subjects. So this originally grew out of an idea I had for an art history related travel application, which I tried to build and which underpins the system, and I may bring some features in where appropriate, but I decided instead to pursue the academic side of it, which is to look at transcribing primary source material, diaries, chronologies, collections of letters in a format where you can see in a timeline everything that happened with a certain person, their life story. You can compare and contrast them against other people. You can select a geographic region and see everything that took place at that time in that area as well. Or you can slice history up by subject matter. Now, because this is built on Neo4j, I'm able, from the beginning I was able to build everything around a taxonomy. So when an entity like a person or an organization or a place is put into the system, I'm able to describe it with attributes. These attributes can be nested into in a taxonomy, which makes, utilizing the graph database, it's in its ability to traverse nodes, allows for some interesting kinds of queries that you would not normally be able to do in a SQL database. So what I was thinking of doing was quickly showing you each screen here and then walking through the administrator backend and how to add an event to the system. So probably the simplest way of looking at the system would be through time, and we can see here that we have a grid of decades. These are the events. The decades are, the size of the decade corresponds to the number of events that we have for that period. So we can sort of see at a glance where the information is centered. Now if we just pick one at random, what we have is a slice of 10 years, from 1490 to 1500. This could be information from anywhere around the world, but the focus of the Codex at this point is the Italian Renaissance. We can see here a graph, a Google graph of the number of events for that period. So we can see a big spike around 1494. We can see the historical sources from which the events are derived. Most of them for this period derive from the diary of Lucca Landucci, who was an ordinary Florentine citizen and left a diary covering 50 or 60 years of his life of events in Florence. And then we can see other people who I mentioned as well, and the term source implies a primary source, so these are the words of these people. So if we scroll down, we can see a typical event and entities associated with it. I'm just going to find one that has a little bit more rich information. So if we scroll down to try and find one that has a taxonomy, we can see here that we have a diary entry from Lucca Landucci. We can see the work it comes from, the page number. We can see the date. We can see a calculation of how much time elapsed between this entry and the previous one on the timeline, and we can see the agents and tags associated with this event. So an agent is either a person or an institution or organization. It's a high-level concept for anyone who can produce events in history. So a person obviously does things in history, but a city might do things as well. Or you might have agents like the Black Death, a plague. They also cause things to happen in history. So all of those examples would be agents. We can see they're listed here. We can see that some of them have attributes associated with them. So we can see that this person's a pope or a bishop, a ruler. We can see as well a section called tags. Now these tags are subject descriptions of the event. So if we look at this event here, describes an embassy or ambassadorial mission to greet the newly elected pope, and it's an embassy from Lorenzo da Vinci to the new pope. We can also see an arrow pointing to another tag. Now this is the parent tag. So I mentioned before how Neo4j allows you to organize nodes in a taxonomy. Well, when you describe an event in the system in this way, you can come back later on and say, well, this event is actually a kind of event, a kind of high-level concept. This comes into play in our data visualization tools and in the way that we can browse the system. So what happens here is everything is linked, so we can click through to these other pages that have this person's timeline or this person's timeline. Now these aren't stored as links; they're stored as basically GUIDs in the text block, and they're rendered at page load time to be links. So when an event is saved, there's hidden information saying, for example, that this text relates to a place called Rome. This text relates to the Pope, and we know I've specified who the Pope is here. So if we mouse over, we can see that it understands that it's this particular entity. Now, if we can obviously see all the things that happened, but if we pop down to the bottom, we can see some data visualization tools. So the first thing that leaps out is a map. Now, this is a map of all the places that were mentioned in that decade. So we can either see a view with info windows, and we can click over things and see what happened, or we can click the hotspots and see the the density map showing the concentration of events. So we can see that most of the events took place in this particular data set around Florence and Rome. So you can get a sense for this decade that most of the action is happening around Florence, and that's because of the events that we have. Now we've got a couple other things here. We've got some word clouds or tag clouds. So the first one we've got the agents. So this is simply a sum of references to these particular agents. So we can see for this decade, King Charles VIII is one of the most significant people. The city of Florence, because the city of Florence can be an agent. The Florentines, the Signoria of Florence, that's the government of Florence. We can click those and see history from their perspective as well. The occupations, these are the attributes. So King Charles is a king. The city of Florence is a body politic. And so we can see what kinds of people, entities, are the ones who are influencing events as well. Now, tags is a bit more interesting. Now, I showed up above here, we can see that we've got a tag. This one is called Significant Encounters. So Raphael comes into contact with the works of Paolo Uccello, a significant encounter in history. Now that tag will appear in here somewhere. Now, one potentially interesting thing about this is rather than just count up the number of tags, because we have in this query access to the entire taxonomy of these tags, these subjects, we can also bring back into this word cloud the particular subject and all of its parents. Now, if we can imagine that each of those tags has a value of 1, if you have 2 events which share the same parent, the lower level events will be 1 each. The parent will have 2 references. So the parent will be a bigger, slightly bigger word in the word cloud. So what you also have is, rather than just seeing every tag in this period, you also find that the higher level tags will rise to the surface. So this kind of gives you like an abstract view. I call this a semantic zoom out. So you're sort of zooming out from the information conceptually. So you can get a sense that embassy, which I've used here to mean ambassadorial missions, journeys or travel, these are some of the most important concepts for this decade from the point of view of the sources. So I'm just going to see if I can find a tag and its parent. Here we go. So we have here Florentine ambassadors. So there are Florentine ambassadors mentioned. Now, that's a subset of this tag called embassy, which is any kind of ambassadorial mission. So if we click that, using the power of the graph database, we can get back every kind of ambassadorial mission. Ambassadors, papal embassies, Florentine ambassadors, French ambassadors, and if we go to the bottom of the page, we can see a map of these events as well. So, and the tag cloud will change to reflect the subject matter. So it enables a way of looking at historical events that's either very low level, we can click on a particular kind of thing, or we can go up and up and up at a conceptual level and see everything relating to a particular concept, in this case ambassadorial missions or diplomacy, essentially. So again, we see the Florence as the center of that information. The other thing we have here is the final tag cloud is themes. Now, themes are conceptually the same as tags, but it's functionally the same as tags. Conceptually, I've just defined a theme as a historical theme that is broader than a particular subject. So, for example, here, this particular event can be described as referring to the appointment of ambassadors, diplomacy between Florence and France. It doesn't really tell you whether this is connected to a particular historical thread. We'd probably say that because it mentions the King of France and Naples, this might have to do with this would probably actually have to do with the French invasion of the Italian peninsula in the 1490s. So that's probably should have been decorated up here with that theme. So if we click that theme, we can actually look at a slice of history in a particular subject rather than just at that tag level. So we can see all the events. Most of them, I think, come from Landucci at this point. We can see that most of Landucci's commentary on the French invasion of Italy is to do with the north of Italy and around Florence in particular, which makes sense because he was a Florentine. And we can see, again, the fine-grained subjects related to that. So that's, we've gone through the time view, we've gone through part of the tag view. We can also go through agents as well. So we could pick an agent like Leonardo da Vinci, and we could see his life. We can see some information about him. These are attributes connected to Da Vinci, student of, follower of. We can also do implied relationships such as fellow students, students of my teacher who are not me, nephews and nieces, and so on and so forth. We can see a graph of Da Vinci's life in terms of the activity, the people who have contributed to this chronicle, and we pop down to the bottom, we can see a map of his life, and I think this more or less corresponds to the level of information that we have on his activities, quite a bit in Florence, a bit on his travels with the Borgias, and quite a bit of activity in and around Milan as well. We can see the historical themes that were important, that were significant to his life, that I mentioned in the documents. We can see the kinds of people he interacted with, and you can see the people who were most mentioned in context with him, his patron and his teacher in this case. Now, another way of looking at the system, we looked at tags already, but there was a feature of tags I didn't mention, which is, as well as assigning a tag to an event and putting a tag within a hierarchy, we can also assign a value to a particular tag. So what I mean by that is, so if we look at this event, 1479, Bernardo Bandini was hung at the windows of the Palazzo. One person was hung. We can see here that 3 people were arrested and hung, and 1 person was hung here. So the reason why I've designed it like this is that when data is put into the system and the user annotates these events, comes up with a tag, selects an existing one, comes up with a new one, I thought at the same time it would be interesting to catch numerical information, because then you can essentially plot these events. You get numerical statistical information for free. So we can see here from these 3 events that there were a number of hangings. Now if we pop down to the bottom, a graph has been automatically generated based on the date of the event, the subject, which is a hanging, and the quantity. So as more information is put in, you'll be able to see, for a particular concept, in this case executions, it could be people killed by a disease or killed in battle or whatever. As that information goes in and is associated with a tag, the graphs will be automatically generated as well. Now if we pop up to places, I think this is fairly straightforward. These are all the places that are mentioned in the system, so we can pop in, pick a place like Florence. We can see all the events that are related to took place in Florence, and where Florence is mentioned. You can see the concentration of them, so as you'd expect, most density would be around Florence itself, but there are of course other places connected with Florence through warfare, diplomacy, that kind of thing. And so we can see with the city of Florence itself, travel, diplomacy, death of all kinds, and so on and so forth is implied in these records. And these are the people who are mentioned in connection with Florence at this point in time. You can either look at the level of the city, but because this is a node-based database, you can also record, containment information, where the city, what region the city is in. So we could pick the region of Tuscany, and we would bring back, Florence, Pisa, Siena, and other cities in Tuscany. So we can expand our view to include events in all these places, and we can look at our visualization for these places as well. So kind of interesting is to be able to look at the themes that relate to a particular region, and as I go on, I hope to put more themes, more historically relevant themes against the events and system. So we can see this is essentially the region of Tuscany. There's quite a bit of activity around Pisa and Florence. The last major one to look at on the public screens is the artifacts. Now, I define an artifact as any kind of man-made object, essentially an artwork, a book, a building. So I don't have to define, separate nodes for each kind of thing. The thing that they have in common is that they're man-made artifacts. So we could pick, for example, a work by Leonardo. We can see it, we can see what it's made out of, and in another part of the system that's not public, you can look for all works that are on poplar panel, made of tempera, and so on, or are stored at the Uffizi. So we can see where this work is referenced in history, and the tags relating to it, and so on. And of course we have a page showing the latest editions. One handy thing here is you can demonstrate, you can also attach images or videos to events. Something I hope to do is to go through and find works by Renaissance composers, and if at all possible, the dates which they were written. Sometimes we know they were written for certain occasions. Quite happily we know, for example, that Dufay wrote a number of works for particular occasions, such as the dedication of the Cathedral of Florence, and he wrote this rather beautiful piece for that. So this is kind of part of my idea of creating an atlas of history, which is a timeline of events interconnected through people and places, subjects, artworks, and where possible as detailed as we can get it, so we can say what day it happened on, what year, we can see what was happening around that time. You can almost imagine like a newspaper. If we get enough information together, we could open up a particular day in the year 1436 and see what works were made, what music was written, but also what ordinary people were doing, and hopefully also capture some numerical, statistical information as well, which can be graphed. Another thing I didn't touch on, I think, was, there was one more screen that's not linked at the top there. A comparative history of agents. So if I can get a timeline for one person, I can get a timeline for two people, I can get as many timelines as we like, depending on how long we want to wait for them. So if we, for example, we wanted to see the life of Leonardo against the life of Michelangelo, we can pull them both back and we can overlay their information. So we can see Leonardo is in the green here, Michelangelo is in the blue. We can see there are areas where they overlap, which you would expect. There are areas where they're very close in space, but they don't quite overlap, and there are parts where they don't really overlap at all. But we can see they both spent quite a bit of time in Florence and Rome, but Michelangelo spent more time in other places. We should be able to see a slideshow of the combined timelines as well. Now, because Da Vinci was about 25 years Michelangelo senior, we might want to pop a bit further forward. But we can see the events. We can see when Da Vinci is doing a painting. We can see when Michelangelo might start to enter the narrative. We can see those interwoven. We can also see them in this section here, which is a little bit vanilla, but we can see, if we pop down, we can start to see what Da Vinci is doing, what Michelangelo is doing at the same time, sometimes on the same day or the same month. In some cases they actually interacted. I believe around 1504 in winter, Michelangelo and Da Vinci were working in competition in the Piazza della Signora, in the palace town hall in Florence on competing commissions, and so they start to overlap. So if you knew a lot about Michelangelo but you didn't know as much about Leonardo, if you wanted to see some context to what's going on, you can look at them side by side as well. So that's just for 2 entities. We could do more. We could show, it doesn't just have to be agents. We could show places or artworks in relation to whatever. We can mix and match anything. But for simplicity, I've kept it to just agents here. I'll finish up by quickly showing how to create an event in the system. So this is the back end to the system. We can see these are all the agents that I mentioned in events and artworks and everything. There are places. There are artworks or artifacts of all kinds, books, paintings, and so on. There are the attachments such as videos, images, our tags, and we can see where they're subsets. Now, if we can also see there's a few other things. There's a vocabulary, which is the taxonomy of categories in the system, which can be organized in different ways. There's also events in the timeline, so we can add an event. Now I've got one ready to go. Now this screen, I've tried to streamline it to make it easy to add events. It does have to be added by hand, unfortunately, but I'm hoping to put in some tools to make that a bit easier as well. So if we pop that in there, we can take a quick look and check out the formatting. One limitation of the system at the moment is that square brackets are reserved for GUID references, so they can't be used for other purposes. So in this case, you can put HTML in here, so I'm just going to put note as a header. Which should satisfy the system. Now, to link to entities in the system, you select the text, you right click. Now I didn't find an exact match to that person, but I do know that he is in there, so I can select that text and search for something else, and I believe this is the person we're looking for. Now I mentioned before square brackets were reserved for the GUID references. We have the type of the node, the GUID, and the text that gets rendered. Now, how I've done this is that when you save this entry, a regex expression will pull out all of these blocks within the brackets. It will create the agents if they don't exist, and will link. It will link to these agents for you. If these links are not already there, if there are agents who are already linked and not mentioned, it will remove those links. So we can right click, we can grab city there. We do a quick search. And we can see, now in this case Michelangelo is mentioned, but if, even though he mentions I and myself and so on to the text, if we didn't actually want to link to Michelangelo specifically, we could simply say, in this case, he's the source of this, because this is a letter from Michelangelo, so he's the historical source. The text comes from the book of his letters. It starts on page 43 and goes to page 44, I believe. We missed a place. Bologna is mentioned. And then we have a couple other things. We've got the date in which this took place. It's the 20th of April. It's exactly that. We can say it's on, around that date, sometime before, sometime after. It could be a date range. We've got the millennium. We might just know it happened sometime in that decade. The reason why I store this information like this rather than a regular date time field is that history is notoriously vague. Sometimes we know things to the day, to the minute. Sometimes we know things only within a certain year. And sometimes we only know things the season that they happened in, or early or late in that year. So I'll just double check the date here, April the 20th, 1507. Now, we're going to add some tags here, and the first one we might think of is that this is a letter. So we can just select letter, and it will, behind the scenes, put a GUID linking this text to that letter. I come up with a few other examples as well that exist in the system. When an artist works on an artwork, I've called that work in progress. In this case, he's talking about assisting his family. So I'm just going to type a new one in, and if it doesn't exist, it will create it when the page is saved. We've got a reference to the plague. We've got various references here, nothing in particular to Bologna, so let's just add that as a new reference. And I think there may be an existing one. Let's call it Dread of the Plague, Healthy Fear. We can put some formatting if we need to with HTML, but I think that's reasonably straightforward. And I think that's all the information we need for this particular event. So grab a copy in case something goes wrong. Let's try and save that. Once it's saved, you can see here, these are the tags that were generated when we right-clicked and selected. This is the rendered text, so you can see the tooltip there gives the full name of the entity, because we have the text portion, but when it fetches back this event and all the related entities, it understands that this GUID refers to this person, and it just generates a link to an agent at that GUID, gives you the text, and gives you the alt text referring to the actual name it has on record as well. That could be quite useful from the Info.j. We can also get back this person's date of birth or any other attributes that we have, and we can show that in conjunction with that text as well, which I mentioned before. We had, when people were mentioned, agents were mentioned, if I know their dates of birth, I can say how old they were when the event took place, which can be quite interesting and significant when you're reading history. Now, if we wanted to create, in this case we were able to select everyone who was mentioned. If we wanted to create a reference to something, say the Bolognese, so the people of Bologna. Now, I don't believe they exist in the system currently, so we can add them. Now, they would be, even though Bologna is a place, the people of Bologna, the citizens, would be an agent, a collective group of people. We don't have a first name, so we can call them the Bolognese, or perhaps in English, they are essentially citizens of Bologna. There's a lot more that can be added to these entities, but this is just the quick add screen. And it's not exactly a profession, but this is the kind of thing that it is. It's a body politic. So we should be able to create. Put that in again there. Should be able to create that. Now, if we search for it, we've now find the Bolognese. Now, we can now save this again. Everything should be fine. If we go back to our list of agents and we look for the Bolognese, we might want to say, that might be how Michelangelo refers to them, but we might want to use some other aliases as well. So we might say Bolognese citizens, people of Bologna. We have the event that they're referenced. We can see this is the screen to edit the agents. We've got all these different kinds of relationships that you can select for them. They are a body politic, they're a citizen of Bologna. We can say they're associated with this, that, and the other. student of a map of events. Now, each of the entities in the system has a screen where you can build up their attributes and their timeline and so on. I won't go into all that right now, it can get a bit more extensive, but if we pop back to the public screen, we can see that this event should have been added to the bottom. And here we go, we have the event, we have the tags. If we click one of those, we can see all the letters in the system. I think there is a bug in this at the moment where it's not showing all the letters. Maybe it's associating with a different node. But we can see all of Michelangelo's events and so on. So this is how you create something in the Codex. I have a few more ideas with what to do with the system. I'm hoping to really beef up the data visualizations and ways of cutting events. And I'm hoping as well that rather than being limited to showing things just as a timeline, I'll be able to put in any kind of document and then link that arbitrarily to moments in time, which means you could put not just chronicles and letters, but you could put anything really, and they will hopefully be able to all come together into an atlas of history. So this concludes my demonstration of Codex. It's gone on a bit too long, but I hope that I've covered the major things. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be glad to go over it. If you would like to be involved in developing the system with me, which I'm doing for free, for fun, please contact me and I'll happily talk to you about that. Thank you for your time.